5 minutes to get us through items 1, 2 and 3. There are no public questions. 5 minutes on progress update and 10 minutes on the forward planning committee's work programme, because quite often you lot have spotted something that needs to change, which is good. Annual scrutiny report, 10 minutes, because it is just for noting, but I think it's probably worth questions should we need to. Policy framework. Now, this should be quite a lengthy item because it's quite a lot of work on this. I'm going to allow 30 minutes, but don't feel you have to fill it. And item 9, council tax premiums. I'm saying 15 minutes, not because it's not a very, very important item for everyone on the island, but at the moment, there's not a lot we can do other than sort of note what's there. So we probably will want to ask some questions, and then 10 minutes for members' question time. Okay, apologies and any changes in membership.
We have apologies from Councillor Palin, Councillor Medland and Councillor Spink, and we have Councillor Downer, substituting for Councillor Adams.
Welcome, Councillor Downer. Minutes. Everyone happy with the minutes from the previous meeting? Do I have a proposer? Thank you. Seconder? Thank you. Any declarations of interest on tonight's agenda? No public questions. Moving on. Progress update. Anybody got anything they want to ask or add on progress update? Councillor Robertson.
Chair, thank you. This committee's asked to look at the settlement agreement that came out of the floating bridge mediation. I just wondered whether Cabinet had come to a decision on that.
Mr. Potter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Robertson. The Cabinet has received the requests in relation to the floating bridge settlement agreement, and the matter is receiving consideration, and you should get a reply shortly indeed.
Anything else? Progress update. Yeah, Councillor Lilly. Not that tired then.
Just on the item about reduction of child poverty, item being scoped, I've actually got quite a lot of data which I'll pass on and make available from the ONS. Actually had someone go through a lot of stuff out. And just to say that they have got a motion about this issue.
Much. Okay, on to forward plan. Anything on the forward plan? No, don't feel free you've got to. I'll go on to committee's work programme. If there's anything on the forward plan, I'll allow you to go back. Just to comment on the committee's work programme, I did approve the BEIS energy support grant because it was an urgent decision, so I signed off on that, so that was okay. And the fees and charges are still on the work programme, have been pushed back, but they've been pushed back to such a level, they just asked the committee if they still wish that to remain on the work programme. Or do we think that the budget has taken care of that for this? It's not to lead you. If you feel it needs to stay on the work programme, just say so. I don't want to take something off if you feel it needs discussion, but there is a concern that the budget's passed now, so it might be not a great use of time. Everyone happy if we just drop that item for this? Yeah, okay. Very much. Anything else on the work programme? No. Yep, Councillor Lilly.
When are we having I remember every 6 months we have the community safety partnership. When are we due for the next one? It seems to be quite a long time since we had quite a lot of community safety issues.
Question.
Only every 6 months.
You remember when the last one was? It might give us a clue when the next one should be.
The item was due to come in November last year, but it was pushed back due. is on the work plan for May.
It'll be on the May.
Yeah.
The May one.
Court scrutiny will come.
Can we make sure, yeah, that it is, because it's, I think it's, because it was meant to be in November, there's actually been, you know, a variety of community safety issues on islands. Really overdue, really.
Fair comment. You're right. It is overdue. Thank you for that. Anything else? Yes, of course.
Is a question
I'll say yes because we discussed it last time, but I agree. That's a fair point. Anything else? Okay, scrutiny annual report item 7. Just really to show what all the scrutiny committees have been up to, but really to update and identify any additional needs or anything that needs developing, but also training. Should anybody think they require training, anything covered from any of the committees they've been on. I mean, it doesn't look like a massive amount, the amount of work that goes into each scrutiny and policy committee, but when you look at the bullet points, there is a considerable amount of work on it. So well done to all of those you sit on a scrutiny committee. And you don't have to highlight any training needs today. Should you have any, feel free to send them through to Mel. I will move on. If we need to go back to that, please feel free, because I don't want to rush you. Now then, the exciting one, Council's Policy Framework, item 8, pages 49 to 62. So there's a hell of a lot of work gone into this. But really, this is clarifying the list of policies shown in the constitutions requiring approval by full council. And there's if you look at the table, there's a comment on every single one of where we are, what needs to happen. So as you've gone through it, it's really if there's anything that you've picked up or you want further clarification of. I mean, some of the policies haven't been reviewed for quite a while. There are 3 recommendations at the end, which are they work concurrently rather than one or the other. It would be for us to approve those if you're happy to. Councillor Lilly.
Just on the harassment and bullying policy, which was due for renewal in April 21. Has it been finalised now? Can I ask someone? Has it been finalised? It says to be finalised in early 2023, which is now, because that's an extremely important policy. That this affects people's lives. If you I speak from my mental health experience. Bullying is an harassment, particularly at work, is a huge part of sickness. It's a huge part of long-term mental illness. Within that, it's extremely high in our schools. It affects the whole life. So I'm a bit alarmed that it, you know, I suppose COVID was during that time. I suppose in that, but I'm just concerned that there's quite a gap, and it is something that we need to be very hot on.
Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 things. Incoming charging, it was due for renewal in August 18. There's no notes to explain anything further. Is that due? Is that? I'm assuming that's everything else has gone past the due for renewal stage. Has got a note attached to it to explain what status that's at. not that one.
We can find an answer to that. Yeah. Yes, of course.
Sorry, and thank you, Chair, through you. And just in relation to the first comment that Councillor Lilly set out, probably needs a bit of clarification in that the harassment and bullying policy is an internal staff arrangement. It's not about harassment and bullying of pupils in schools. So it's about a staff, it's an internal policy. It's still in its final draft form being prepared for sign off. And I note the comments that Councillor Lilly made about the impact that bullying and harassment can have on sickness in particular. I think it's important to say that we monitor sickness in staff on a monthly basis across the council and within individual directorates. There are no issues that are showing themselves as a result of that monitoring that are linked directly to harassment and bullying issues. But we do take those issues very seriously in any case.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you. There are a handful of policies here that say they'll be finalised in early 2023. I mean, in relation to all of them, I guess we're coming out of early 2023 fairly soon, or arguably already have. I mean, in relation to all of them, can we say there's a date by which the lot of them will have been signed off or pending further update?
Councillor Quirk.
Going to the proposed recommendations, basically agree with them, but I think the third one is in addition to say that progress will be reviewed regularly, because everything appears to have taken note of change, but it hasn't changed yet. So I don't think we can be quite as positive as the third item says. I think it needs to have something along the lines of this will be reviewed.
Okay. Do we need to move that as a formal motion? Yeah. So would you like to move? Anyone like to second that?
To add, sorry, under recommendations, the third recommendation, it sort of says it as an absolute, but it's not an absolute yet. So I think we should add a line that says progress will be reviewed regularly by this committee.
Proposed by Councillor Quirk, seconded. Councillor Lilly and Councillor Drew. Those in favour? Marvellous. Very much. Now, that said, do we approve the recommendations? Yeah. Councillor Robertson.
Just make one further comment in relation to the councillor code of conduct refers to the council's constitution without opening up an entire other debate. I know the constitution is undergoing some work at the moment with an intention possibly to bring it forward to May's annual meeting. Is that still going ahead? And probably the second part of my question while the mic's being operated is if it is going ahead, what will the scrutiny process leading up to it being sort of released in the full council papers be, if any?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Robertson. In May of last year, the full council formally resolved that the current constitution be reviewed in the light of practice and comments put forward by various members over a period of time. In terms of the anticipated timescale for that review, I've actually started looking at part 2 of the constitution. Similar to the way I produced the paper for the planning protocol in terms of belt and braces approach, looking at the basis upon which certain information is put in there, whether it's the particular legislation or case law or whatever, by way of endnotes, and specifically for the purpose to discuss with members, including members of corporate scrutiny, or any sort of changes which members might want to see. It's a slow process because obviously one's having to fit it in, and with other matters. But the actual direction of travel is obviously under the guidance of the Audit and Governance Committee. but I must stress the emphasis is very much engaging with every single councillor of this local authority, so that where there are certain options for choices to be made, then members can be fully acquainted with the options and the potential implications. I think sort of having had the opportunity of looking at the Constitution the last 2 years and a bit, there are obviously improvements which certainly can be made in the Constitution, including cross-referencing and so forth, including, I think, probably using it as a training tool as well to assist us all in the conduct of business. And that's why I think the paper on the policy framework is particularly useful and has been brought before this committee. Because policies, without going into the detail too much, certain policies, as you are aware, are for full council to approve. Sometimes those policies are put forward for recommendation through the cabinet route. Other policies are actually start and end with the cabinet for approval. Parliament hasn't actually given a wonderfully clear steer on these things. I think you've probably seen that from the actual report on the policy framework. So we'll have to work through all that as part of the Constitution as well, to explain to members that there is power, should full council decide to exercise it, to move approval of policies which are currently for the cabinet alone to approve, for full council to approve. Why you don't want to do that, I'm not sure. But the reason I mention that is there's a lot of depth behind the Constitution, behind the legislation. I think it's important to bring that alive. And another quick example is obviously well-intentioned, saying that all members of the council can attend private sessions of cabinet. That's well-intentioned, but the actual legislation makes it by invitation. So there's a few things we need to tease out, and then it's very much for members to, use the rules accordingly to make it work. So we have a snagging list, which we keep regularly up to date. So if at any time, things niggle you, or you think, well, what about X, Y, and Z? Then, by all means, let me know. We'll build that into the review process. And in terms of the mechanics of it, I think that's something we'll have to discuss in detail, probably through group leaders and the underlined councillors, to say sort of, how would you like it to be dealt with? Because what I don't want is to sort of seek to dictate to anybody. It's important that it's owned by the organisation, particularly by councillors.
Councillor Robertson, then Councillor Drew.
Thank you. I think, Chair, the issue I sort of foresee is we haven't got a huge amount of time between now and annual council. There'll be a number of changes which I suspect will meet with cross-party approval and be uncontroversial. And there'll be other proposed changes where, some councillors may want to see those changes happen and others won't. How we deal with all that within the formal meetings of this council, including corporate scrutiny, and how we deal with it in formal meetings, which have a very important role to play, group leaders, non-aligned, etc. And in terms of this committee, we've only got, 2 more meetings before annual council, April and May. So if it's not on, corporate scrutiny, yeah, so it would have to be on the agenda for the next meeting. And we'd want to make a lot of practical progress before then, so that it comes to this committee with a lot of the informal scrutiny and conversations having taken place, so we're not having them here unnecessarily.
Through you, Chairman, absolutely. I think that this shows how crucial it is to engage with members as to the understanding for the timescales, what is viewed as particularly pressing, needs amendments sooner rather than later, and that type of thing. Constitutions are internal documents, as you know. the important thing is that they work and they're not a distraction. But also it's work in progress. There'll always be things which will emerge through changes in legislation and so forth. But in short, time is short. So again, if you could feed through in due course any particular pressing matters which haven't already been communicated, then obviously I can discuss that with others as to what might be achieved within the timescales.
And have something penciled for the agenda for next corporate scrutiny. It'll have to be May.
It'll be May, yeah. Thank you. Councillor Drew.
Thank you, Chair. I note in relation to the DBS policy that no review date is identified. I was wondering, in view of present and recent developments in the council with a certain councillor, whether it may be time to review that a little more in depth. I appreciate that it's a controversial suggestion potentially in relation to councillors undertaking a DBS check, but my view actually is that it should be the default position. Potentially councillors can then opt out if they so wish, but I mean, I think we need to have a much wider debate about it. I mean, is it possible that we could potentially subsume that debate within the councillor code of conduct review, or where it might perhaps best be met, but it's certainly something that I think we need to address one way or another.
It's a good point, and that reminds me I was going to submit that as a motion to full council, so I'll message you. We could do that together if you wish. Councillor Lilly.
I was originally put my hand up, but on the DBS scrutiny, I did put a motion for DBS some time ago, and basically, if I'm right, under the sort of rules that govern councillors, that you could have it voluntarily, but you couldn't have it compulsory. I totally in agreement with you. That's why I put that forward. But actually, I do think councillors, because we're corporate parents, right? And we actually go, although in a corporate parenting sort of board meeting, you're not actually on your own with children, but you are being introduced to children who will then identify with you outside and would see that, oh, I've met them there, so that person must be safe. So I will be fully supportive of any councillors that wish to put and actually raise this again. Because actually, I think as councillors, we're meeting people all the time. I am DBS, enhanced DBS check. That's through being on the Isle of Wight Youth Trust and other bodies. But there are councillors that have none of that, but they're meeting people every day. And that's not disregard to them, but people do slip through the net.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Drew and Councillor Lilly. Yes, the matter of DBS checks, you absolutely right. You raised it. It has been looked into. It hasn't been finalised. It does need to be finalised. And I think the suggestion made by Councillor Drew is a good one. Whilst it wouldn't be necessarily incorporated, unless you wanted it incorporated in the Constitution, it would be one of those policies which clearly needs to be considered by councillors and exist, stand by the Constitution, so that the links are there. Obviously, you mentioned about corporate parenting and various other matters as well, which I think illustrates that point about the need for ensuring we've got things cross-referenced and understood. And in terms of checks were made at the time in terms of those members who currently gain access to information, and we undertook to check that current DBS checks were held by those relevant councillors. They indeed have been. But there is a wider issue, which was highlighted by Councillor Lilly, and I've got that on my work programme to deal with.
Yeah.
Just to note something, it's on page 60, our favourite subject, the local development power. I just wanted to make reference there that I think it was very clearly said at the last meeting when an extension was sort of given because of the NPPF side, that it should come back to full council in July. And I just want to re-emphasize that, because there's a whole kind of consultation process that it went through. And we are planning committee is still operating under the 2012. And so it's important that we don't lose sight of that. It's very important that we make sure, from the scrutiny point of view, that we do track it. We do make sure that it does come back to full council, and if it doesn't, we've got a very strong reason why, an explanation. Can I ask a question? The chief executive might know. Have we got any? We were meant to have the new NPF sort of being published. Has that been published yet?
Through the chair, thank you. The consultation has closed, or is coming to a close. There won't be any amendments made to the actual NPPF until government have looked at the consultation and debated what they want to do about changes to the NPPF itself. And I've got no time scale yet from government in terms of when that's likely to happen.
Okay, anything else on policy framework? I think some important points raised there. Well done. Item 9, council tax premiums on second homes. Oh, didn't agree the options. Yes, so I got so carried away. Glad you're here, Mel. I'm going, Chris. Thank you. So yes, so do we approve of the options as amended by Councillor Quirk? All those in favour? Any against? No. Hold on. Actually, item 9, council tax premiums on second homes and empty properties. Now, just check, does everyone understand what we're looking at here? Because this is a very popular policy, but it's popular to the point we can't do anything about it until it becomes law. So what we're doing is a statement of intent, as it were, when it does become law. Now, there's a lot of complication around the law, and somebody better informed than me will explain the process it's going through. Let's start with any questions or comments anyone would like to make. Councillor Quirk.
Whilst I can see the appeal for the finances, we don't actually know what the final legislation is going to say yet. So it seems more sensible to wait until you know what you're approving, rather than just approving it unseen. It does seem a little more preemptive.
Yeah, agreed. And that is part of the concern, but my understanding, I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is we have to make it a statement of intent, then will be rectified at cabinet once the bill is launched. Is that correct? And I'll come to
Thank you, Chair. The levelling up and regeneration bill is currently going through Parliament, as you say. It's at committee stage in the House of Lords. It's a question of choice as to whether or not to have a declaration of intent at the moment. Some authorities have done that. At the moment, sort of relevant clauses, I think clause 75 and 76 in relation to the second homes and empty properties. Within those clauses, there is I think it's maybe clause 76. It talks about a billing authority having to, its first determination to be made at least 1 year prior to the financial year when the premium is imposed. At the moment, as I say, the provision in the bill talks about the earliest date at the moment being 2024 to 2025. That's obviously dependent the bill receiving the roll of senate by the end of the. That is obviously unlikely given it's a stage in the House of Lords. So it's a question of choice as to whether or not to have a declaration of intent. As I say, some local authorities have chosen that particular.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's extraordinarily premature for the Cabinet to be putting this on its agenda, a statement of intent about a law that doesn't yet exist. And it's not just an intention about direction of travel. I'd be supportive of a general statement that the council might want to take advantage of tax premium levied on second homes, but to actually quantify it as 100% increase for second homes, I think shows that the Cabinet isn't taking the question sufficiently seriously enough. Without having the law in front of it and us, how can we possibly be expected to comment, debate, or give an indication on the amount of premium on second homes? So I thoroughly disagree with quantifying it at all. I think it's premature and I think it's irresponsible. But I can agree to a general point that the council might want to take advantage of a tax premium if the law comes in.
Councillor Lilly. Sorry, Councillor John.
So it's very clear that the bill, if it's enacted, provides the ability to enact a council tax premium on second homes of up to 100%. There are also other provisions, as you're probably aware, within the legislation that provide higher levels of premium in certain circumstances which are already recorded. The requirement is, quite rightly, as Chris Potter points out, requiring us to make a declaration of intent at least 12 months before we actually enact it. So in common with, I have to say, a very large number of other local authorities and a growing number, almost it seems every week at the moment, and supporting the levelling up bill which is going through Parliament, our goal here is to declare our intent in common with all the other local authorities that are doing exactly the same. That clearly is what is implied within the legislation, that they require you to declare if you will be doing that. There's no requirement for us to declare anything other than 100%, although we could declare something less than that. But clearly the recommendation we have developed is that we will put this through Cabinet with a recommendation we declare that intent now. It isn't a hurdle of declaring it at least as an intent at least 12 months before we put it into place. At some stage, and I don't know when, that legislation, the levelling up bill, will either complete its journey through the regulatory process and receive royal assent, or it won't. Last time I looked, it had been through the Commons, it was in the Lords, it had very broad cross-party support going through the parliamentary processes. There were relatively few changes at this stage of the legislation. The original premise for the law was generated by and large by Conservative authorities in the southeast. I think we're all aware of that, and that's where the large body of support started from. It's since obtained very broad support across the country, because what it does is it seeks to tackle the problem we have of empty, abandoned properties and areas where we have a very high proportion of second homes, and at the same time, a very large need for local housing. So the premise of it is not to achieve additional income for local authorities. That may be a secondary effect. The primary effect is to bring back empty and vacant properties into useful, productive use, and to provide some degree of solution to the housing need in those areas. So the intent is very clear, and what we're seeking to do is declare, in common with other local authorities, our intent to follow suit. And at some stage, once that legislation is finalised, we can then come back to the full council, complete that declaration. The intent will already have been made, and we can enact it at the earliest opportunity. And I've discussed this with a number of other local authorities, and their view is unanimous in terms of the process, why would you wait and risk foregoing the income and risk foregoing the activation date to start bringing these properties back into use? So it's a very clear common message nationwide at the moment, and supported, of course, on a cross-party basis through Parliament.
Does that mean it has to be at next full council, or could it be a council meeting after, when they're more likely to have an idea of what the bill contains?
So after the bill is enacted in its final form, i.e. it receives royal assent, then there will be a motion brought back to full council to enact that. But the declaration of intent will already have been made.
So I will come to you, Councillor Robertson, but so if we don't, because I know it's on for the full council on the 15th of March, and Councillor Robertson raises a fair point about the detail, is if it's not on full council the 15th of March, what does that mean in terms of implementation date on the island?
Well, that depends on the final wording of the bill at the end of the day. But as I read it at the moment, and it seems that others are reading it, I know there was a big discussion on this on Portsmouth just the other day, and others, all the way from North Yorkshire down to Devon and Cornwall, and several places in the southeast. The reading seems to be very common, that by making the declaration of intent before that financial year, i.e. in March, we have then made a declaration of intent, and we can enact it at some stage in the future at the earliest opportunity. If we delay that, we will then have to give the declaration of intent and wait another 12 months before we can actually bring the motion to enact it. So you may, well, you may lose a minimum of 1 month and a maximum of 12 months of revenue, and of course that revenue is considerable. But the primary thing is that delays bringing those, if you like, the stick here at the end of the day, of bringing those empty properties back into productive use, and that is the primary goal.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. I think the Cabinet member's mistaken. I don't think a statement of intent needs to be made before the law comes in order to then backdate an enactment when the law comes in. I just think that's factually incorrect. Until the law is passed, the council cannot make a decision. It cannot make a decision and then, before the law comes in, and then make a decision after the law comes in and say, actually, the decision date was that date back in March 2023. I think that's wrong, and I'd ask the monitoring officer to give a clarification on that.
It isn't we're enacting it now. We're making a declaration that is our future intent. So you can regard this as a conditional policy, which is enacted at a later date. But we are giving a very clear message as to intent at the earliest possible opportunity.
But you're suggesting that we will miss an opportunity if we don't do that now, and I think that's incorrect with respect.
Well, okay, the words that I've got actually from the bill talk about billing authorities intending to adopt, not adopting yet, but intending to adopt from the levelling of bill, are required to declare their intentions at least 12 months prior to the financial year in which the changes come into effect. So it's not a question of when you bring it into effect, it's a question of when you make the declaration. That's the wording which is used. So we are making that declaration at the earliest opportunity in common with others.
Get clarification from our monitoring officer, Chris, if you would.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillors Jarman and Robertson. As has been said, it is a bill going through Parliament, so it is subject to change. I've just brought up on the screen what I believe to be the current proposal, the bill, which is to insert a new section 11C into the Local Government Finance Act 1992. And this new provision, when it's enacted, section 11C subsection 3 says, and this is in the context of higher amounts for dwellings occupied periodically, i.e. second homes. It says a building authority's first determination under this section must be made at least 1 year before the beginning of the financial year to which it relates. So the present wording of the bill talks about a determination under this section. Well, obviously, a clause in a bill is not a section yet. It has to be enacted. So the difficulty for local authorities up and down the country is if this requirement for at least 1 year before the beginning of the financial year remains in the bill, then it acts as a delaying mechanism before the premium can be imposed. As things stand at the moment, the earliest would be obviously 2024, 2025, assuming the bill is enacted by the end of this month, which is highly unlikely. There is a provision in relation to the empty properties, and that actually, in a different context, currently it's a 2-year period for empty properties. The proposal in the bill is that it be reduced to only 1 year. And one of the provisions in the bill is that the clock starts now in terms of the period of 1 year running for an empty property, because it specifically says, before this part comes into force. So that's different from actually imposing a premium. Basically says, if someone's property is empty and meets all the other conditions from tonight, you can wait a year, and if the legislation's in force at that later time, they're already caught. That's the only backdating I'm aware of. But as I say, the bill is going through the House of Lords at the moment, and a number of authorities have decided by choice to indicate that they will be predisposed to certain course of action. Clearly, I'll leave it to members to debate at the appropriate time as to their views on this particular matter. Thank you.
Did you want a point of clarification, Councillor?
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you. On the second homes, it seems fairly obvious from the way the bill is currently drafted that 12-month period from when a council makes a decision on what premium it's going to charge to that premium coming into effect cannot be backdated from when the bill comes in. So until the bill comes in, that 12-month can't start. So it's irrelevant whether the Cabinet make an indication this week or not. And for that reason, I don't think it should be making an indication. I think it's entirely unnecessary. I support the idea of premiums and I support the bill, but I don't support the Isle of Wight Council giving an indication that's not a decision and can't be a decision.
I've got Councillor Lilly, then Councillor Quirk.
I can understand where Councillor Robinson's coming from, but I actually think, I think it's quite sensible to actually put forward an intention, right? Because we have this real issue, and actually, I'm quite close to a number of councillors in Cornwall, who are making a similar or made a similar decision. That this is a real issue, and you have to give hope to the community that you're tackling issues. We've got young people who cannot, get mortgages, don't have a future on housing, and we as authority do need a declaration of intent to be able to say we're actually tackling this issue. I'm in a ward. I think you might be in a ward, Councillor Quigley. I think Councillor Robertson's definitely. I'm in a ward where I can visibly see empty properties. There are empty properties on Marlborough Road as you come out of the bay, and you see them straight away. They could have, housing. So anything that we need to prepare to get those buildings in, because I have people that are homeless in my ward, and there's properties that they could move into, and they want to move into to be near their relatives for a variety of reasons, caring, support, and so on. And the other is I walk every day by second homes that are probably used 2 weeks in a year, right? And again, and we do, and I have a real worry with the housing developments that probably happening in my ward. Or, I prefer not to, but I sort of think that most of those are going to be at a price, and a lot of those will be second homes because it's very close to the sea. It's a very nice location. So I actually think by telling the world that we have an intention is giving a message to people that, get your act together, get those empty properties if you owe them out, right? If you're going to be a second homer on the island, you are going to have to pay a high premium for it.
I think, I'd like to think everyone in the chamber will be in agreement that we need to tackle this issue. Certainly at governmental level, it's had a lot of cross-party support. The danger is hope's what you do when you haven't got a plan. And the danger is signaling intent when we can't actually influence it is as dangerous as doing nothing. And that's my concern, Councillor Lilly, is that Councillor Robertson, at the point, and not wanting to put words into Councillor Robertson's mouth, is at this point in time, we're in danger of promising the moon on a stick, and the bill might come back with not the moon on a stick. I don't have any issue with the numbers in this. I really don't have an issue with the numbers in this. I think that's very fair, but it's not down to me. The process has to be, we have to get this right. And as our monitoring officer said, is that it's quite clear that we can put a stake in the ground now on empty properties, but that stake in the ground doesn't appear to be the same for second homes. My only concern is that we fudge this. I don't want us to fudge this because it's a really important point. Councillor Cook.
Yes, a simple one. Have the LGA or the council taken legal advice as to whether preempting it will actually count?
So, yes, there's been an extensive discussion with the LGA conducted by Councillor Stevens. There've also been dialogue with our legal department and our monitoring officer with the LGA. We don't have definitive views from them in many regards. One of the guiding elements I have here, though, in terms of those discussions, has been a question that was raised about, well, what is the downside? Is there a downside of us doing this now, of giving this intent? If the intent enables us to bring this into force earlier, then that is a win. If there is something flawed in what we do now, is there a downside of that which would delay that process at all? And the answer to that seems to be no. So if there is no downside to this and only upside, then surely the best way to do is to err on the side of caution, even though we don't know what some of those individual words might be in the final version. Let's err on the side of caution, take the earliest opportunity, and that is exactly the logic which other authorities are taking.
Councillor Gender, she'd like to add.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a really important discussion. It's going to help us on Thursday at Cabinet, and obviously all of us at full council next week. And kind of, I was about to say, got Councillor Jarman said the way you might have been, reading it about it. And from my perspective, it seems we're taking a belt and braces approach to this. I mean, yes, our trousers may not fall down with just the braces or the belt, but surely, what's the issue with going at it with the full coverage, really? And I think it's really important that, as Councillor Lee said, that we're honest and open and give reassurance to our residents that we as a council are willing to take advantage of what the government are offering on the table, which Wales has had advantage of that for some time, and we've been quite jealous of the fact, I think, that we know we're taking advantage of every opportunity to bring in some extra income that's much needed for our residents, and potentially maybe they may free up some homes as well in the process. So really, really important, this discussion. So thank you for letting me just speak briefly, Chair.
Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate what Councillor Roberts is saying, and also yourself, Chair. I think I'm just trying to weigh up the positives and negatives of a statement, because I don't really think it matters all that much, but the positives to me are, one, you're communicating to the residents of the island what we're intending to do, which I think is important, because I think there's a lot of islanders that have been waiting for something like this for quite some time. And I think also it sends a message that if a good number of councils are putting out this statement of intent, it puts a good message to government and Parliament about what we want this bill to do. And I think the more councils that do that, you're going to get a stronger, hopefully a stronger bill at the end of it. So that's kind of where I'm sitting.
Councillor Robertson.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Jones-Evans has just said it's a good opportunity for raising money, whereas Councillor Jarman says it's not principally about raising money. And I think that highlights the issue here. It needs proper, fulsome debate and discussion, and to try and sort of truncate that debate by having an early indication quantified at 100%, I just think is a mistake.
I think again, not much to put words in people's mouths. I think we all back the intent to enact the bill. I think if I called for a vote now, that would be a positive. I think the debate on the numbers, you're right, actually, as it gets close to the enactment, we would be failing as a democratic organisation if we didn't allow debate around it, regardless of what my personal feelings are. A lack of debate around that would be wrong. I do worry that we agree a statement of intent that goes to the public and they see what we're intending with the numbers on, and then it's somehow in the debate that doesn't get passed through, because there could be a lot of changes between now and when that actually ends up at full council once the bill's gone through. So I do share your concerns, Councillor Robertson. In terms of what else we need to debate, anything else anybody needs to go through, because we do need to decide whether we're going to debate the recommendations, and you've got an amendment or addition to your recommendations as well on a single sheet. Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, and my apologies if I'm mistaken. Whereabouts are we actually specifying that our intent is 100% premium? Because the bits I'm reading at the moment are just implying
there's an additional sheet.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, on the second sheet there too, there's the wording, the final wording going to Cabinet, which is the Cabinet recommending to the full council, and that includes the 100% premium for second homes and the 100% premium for empty properties. And then you'll see the draft resolution, which is here for full council on the 15th of March, which is for them to support that. Of course, it's possible that somebody would bring forward a proposed amendment at full council, and they might say, well, rather than go for the full 100%, I think we should only go for 10%, for example. That would be possible, or to leave it open until some later time. But I think the clarity that we need to give to the island, to the market, needs to be unambiguous. And certainly that has been the case with every other authority making a declaration so far. I don't think ambiguity is good. And I believe very strongly that the residents of this island would be very pleased to see us putting 100% premium on, i.e. the maximum that draft legislation will allow us to do. To declare any restriction on that at this time would seem to be self-restricting and would probably bring, I'm sure, quite strong condemnation from our 151 officer in not maximising our revenue opportunity. But I would stress that the goal here, although it does raise additional revenue, is to bring those empty homes back into productive use. And as Councillor Lilly quite rightly pointed out, I'm sure in all of our wards, we will pass it. I mean, there are some very close to my own house in Yarmouth, Councillor Spink's ward, where 80% now of those homes are second and vacant properties. It has an appalling impact on the local economy, on our schools, and on the ability of restaurants in those areas often to survive. So we want the vitality brought back to the island. We want the homes available to islanders, and we want to show the earliest possible intent of our commitment as a strong council to do so.
Councillor Lilly, then actually no, I'm going to go Councillor Downer first because you've had a bit of a go. Councillor Downer, then Councillor Lilly.
I'm sure Councillor Lilly's words will be much more profound than mine. What I would like to ask the monitoring officer, please, Mr. Potter, You say it's in the House of Lords at the moment, is that correct? How long do you envisage before it receives royal assent after it goes back to the Commons? Thank you.
Chairman. At the moment, we don't actually know. It's at the committee stage in the House of Lords, so there's a few more stages yet. The levelling up and regeneration bill, I think when I last looked a day or so before, they were at part 2 of the bill, looking through the devolution, and I think they're talking about combined authority amendments and so forth. Those provisions are before the provisions we're just talking about tonight in terms of second homes and empty properties. So the bill itself is of considerable length. So again, as they are proceeding in a sequential manner, we did ask the LGA, I think, if they had any idea as to, likely timescales. And I think the response was, well, it's a matter for Parliament and no. So rather than mislead, I just have to say, I don't know. If I had to guess, it would be probably sometime no earlier than the summer, but I'm prepared to eat my words if it's done quickly.
Basically, how long's a piece of string?
Twice as long as half of it. Councillor Lilly, one of your succinct comments would be most welcome.
I think going back, we are a scrutiny committee, right? And we're scrutinising it. And our whole point is we just give our views or recommendations to the Cabinet. That's our purpose. In that case, we have scrutinised this. From what I gather from everyone, there seems to be a consensus, and from the advice that we got from our monitoring officer on the empty properties, actually giving a declaration of intent seems relevant to do that. So on 2, the item 2, I think there is a consensus that we would say, actually, to the Cabinet from a scrutiny point of view, and from the view from the monitoring officer, actually, that is a sensible thing to do. On 1, I think there's an area where we would say as a scrutiny committee that they need caution, and we're concerned that the message, right, could be premature, right? And we would want the Cabinet to take on board the sensitivity, right, of that. You'll probably come up with better words than I can so quickly. But that's where I think we're at, and I think I'm happy for that to be put into a proposal, and I'm happy to make that as a proposal.
Thank you, Chair. Just to make clear, obviously, it is a bill going through Parliament. I'm making no suggestion one way or another in terms of an officer, except that the bill is going through Parliament, is liable to change. Yes, a declaration of intent can be made. It cannot be relied on to do something now to start the clock running. The legislation does mention in relation to the empty properties bit that, if you just humor me slightly, find it. Clause 75, subsection 2. The amendments made by subsection 1, that's basically 2 years substitute 1 year, have effects for financial years beginning on or after the 1st of April 2024. And in relation to the amendment made by subsection 1B, that's the 1 year bit, it does not matter whether the period mentioned in section 11B8 Local Government Act 1992 begins before this section comes into force. Translated what I said earlier, you can start the 1 year of a property being empty, and obviously then charge a premium once the legislation comes into force. The other provision in terms of second homes, you heard me mention that obviously the first determination under the section, has to be made at least 1 year prior. Clue are the words under this section. These are clauses of a bill. It's only when the bill gets enacted in those terms that it would be a determination under the section. So it cannot possibly start the clock running at this present moment in time. But this is a political debate that is for members to determine.
Councillor Robertson.
Chair, in search of a motion that we can all agree, I've got two suggestions. One is to simply approve the recommendation in the papers, the corporate scrutiny papers that were sent to us on notice, or taking what Councillor Lilly says and looking at this sheet of paper that was only presented to us as we walked into the meeting. The new information in that sheet of paper is the percentage premium. If we would simply take those figures out, I don't have a problem with the Cabinet recommending to full council that it intends to introduce a council tax premium, both for second homes and for empty properties. That's the essence of this anyway, provided we're not asking full council to agree 100% before laws come in. So if we strike out the percentage, I'm happy with pretty much any wording we've got in front of us.
Okay, so to summarise, as a committee, we're happy to enact the bill, and we're happy for a statement of intent that we will put a premium on both second homes and empty properties, which the second part starts the clock running now, but we don't need to separate that out. So as Councillor Robinson says, are we happy with that as a propose that as a bear in mind it's just a recommendation to Cabinet, so they can do what they like, I suppose, but I think that's a good alternative. Suppose, have we seconded it yet?
It would just be really helpful. Is there a figure that the committee would think will be the right amount to?
The point being is there's no point offering a figure yet until the bill's enacted, and then that will be part of the democratic process of full council. Because there's no point, because the clock doesn't count until the bill's enacted on point 1. Right. On point 2, we could include the figure of 100% because in theory, but again, we only have to say an intent to raise a premium. We don't have to say the amount, do we, at this point for empty properties?
Any amount, but the legislation caps it at 100.
Chair, just to clarify the point. No declaration can be relied upon to start the clock now. In terms of imposing a premium on second homes. And just to clarify the points mentioned about the long-term empty dwellings, the current provision in the bill itself would say that the 1 year start of an empty property before that section comes into force. So there's an element within the bill of allowing a period to start to run, but that is separate from imposing a premium directly. It's related to a particular property. So
back to where we were, to Councillor Robertson's point. We proposed a motion, it's been seconded by Councillor Lee. Those in favour of saying we support enactment of the bill for a premium on second homes and empty properties. Those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? No. One question on some of the detail is we've talked about whether it's raising revenue, whether it's creating empty properties, is the raising revenue is quite clear. That's very well laid out. Thank you for that detail. It doesn't mention how many homes we expect to bring to market. And I'd like to see some detail around that because again, that's one of those things is if we're going to give people hope, we need to have a plan what that looks like. So do we have an idea of how many homes that would release back into the market based? I know it's 9% in Wales, which would be about 270 of our second homes, but there's nothing about empty properties.
So we do have a register and we do have a number, but the question is how many does it affect? There are a number of elements in the detail of this that will need to be looked at. For example, the actual wording that describes what is a second home and what is an empty property needs to be very specific. There is the possibility that properties who might fall into those categories, which at the current time might be judged as residential properties, might at some other date be judged as business properties, although that incurs other issues regarding capital gains, etc., etc. So the actual number isn't something we can be definitive about today. All we can do is use some calculations which extrapolate what a potential might be. There are many variables that could change that. The other question, of course, is that people may dispose of properties which today might be chargeable were we to have that figure now. And by the time we get round to actually levying that charge, they've been disposed of or in some other way transferred. So trying to extrapolate what the figure might be in 2 years' time would be very difficult.
Again, I appreciate that. But I think, again, as part of the package is Councillor Robertson made a valid question about raising of revenue and empty properties, which led to the debate about not putting a figure on it. It's quite clear that the additional revenue, give or take, however many houses drift in and out, is going to be about 6 million for second homes and 286,000 for empty properties, which are serious sums of money, which would make a massive difference to this year's budget. I'm fully aware of that, and wouldn't it have been nice if we were in that position? Based on the figures in Wales, 9% of the second homes coming back on the market is about 270 homes. Okay, that's great. That's nothing. There's nothing wrong with that. I can't get how many think of the empty properties we think would end up being made available as on the market. And I know I agree with what you said. It's very difficult to ascertain, but I would have thought we'd have some idea, because if we were talking about 1,200 homes being released, we'd be like, yes, we've solved half the housing problem and raised revenue. But at the moment, to me, it would seem that the mechanism to create more homes is to use the revenue from the second homes to build them. I'm quite happy to be corrected.
No, I think you're right. It's a remarkably difficult judgment to make. I don't think it's correct, probably, to equate the Isle of Wight with any other authority. I think in many ways we are quite unique, and I always like to think of the island as being unique. It depends on what you're doing here. You're providing effectively a stick. It's not a carrot. This is definitely a stick measure. And it may well be that a number of people with empty homes who are using those as investment properties simply decide to continue as such. And to decide what percentage that might be on the island versus in Wales, I think would be a very difficult judgment to make. So I think I'd just be very reluctant to be drawn on an actual number there. In a way, if we do have empty properties where we're charging a premium on them, the reason why people would or would not bring those back into circulation is something we would have to wait and see. It's information we'll get at a later date. I would very much like to think that people would not only look upon this as a stick, but as a wider incentive of intent, that we are trying to maximize the use of current properties on the island without the necessity to continue building more, particularly more second homes that also remain empty for 48 weeks of the year. And the intent is has to be very clear here. So I think a number is very difficult. I know you're trying to press me on it, Chair, but it is very difficult. It's really the intent that lies behind it, which is manifest.
Any further questions? Councillor Lilly.
I think Councillor Jarman has said, it is about the stick. I think we need this would be one part of our overall strategy to actually bring properties and housing opportunities for people that actually need housing on the island. And I think we need, along with particularly the empty properties, we need a clear strategy that there is a number of ways that actual local people could have the money to take those properties and actually convert them, whether it's through housing cooperatives, through the community-led housing sort of side, so that people, whether it's through parish and town councils, and also our existing housing associations, but we need a clear strategy that when a property does become available and it coming back onto the market, it can actually be bought by the community in some way to actually make available all through various schemes. There needs to be a manual, right, of these various sort of sticks, along with some carrots as well, so that we can actually get these housing. I'll just give an example. On two big properties that are empty, been working for some time to use various legislation, empty properties thing, to get them out. There is a veterans organisation now well established. They have worked with a housing group in Herefordshire, so that if those came on property, they would have the money to buy them, buy it. You would have a training scheme for homeless veterans to actually come in and do it. We need those kinds of initiatives building up to be able to take advantage and the property. Otherwise, these properties will go into another person's hands and still be empty.
I get what you're saying, Councillor, but this is part of my issue with thinking this is going to be a massive solution to the housing crisis, because it's not within the council's gift who buys an empty property, and there's no point in pretending that it is, unless we compulsory purchase properties.
Absolutely, but we can actually look at whilst we're doing this, we can look at a variety of ways in a manual alongside this. So there are a number of opportunities. I'm old enough to know that this was a big issue in the 70s and 80s. And that's when you had all these housing cooperatives were set up by ordinary people to done. Now they're multi-million organisations with boards that don't particularly care about people on the ground. But those were all started by people taking that action on empty properties in the 80s and the 10s. And we need to be going back to do those similar kind of initiatives.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but I think we're in danger of overplaying our hand. Councillor Robertson.
Chair, just I think a fairly obvious comment on the figures. I take that 6 million potential revenue generated from this to be based on all those with second homes and empty properties actually paying at 100% premium, in which case there'll be, on the flip side, no benefit of bringing houses into the market, rental or purchase. On the flip side, if second home owners and owners of empty properties do decide in some number to sell homes or put them into the rental market, that £6 million will be much diminished. It's a bit of an either or. You're not going to have both benefits. Should be a fairly obvious point, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right, Councillor Robertson, perfectly correct. From, although the council is in desperate need of funds, my personal desire, use the word personal here, would be to see as many of these properties coming back into productive use as possible, where we did not achieve that money. That would be a much better outcome. There is, I think, a number of schemes which incentivize developers to take properties and to convert them and upgrade them and bring them back into productive use. I think there's also a very strong moral issue when I look at the carrots here, which might incentivize people to bring them back into productive use. And I think the combination here of the moral side and we would trust some continuance of government schemes to incentivize them to be repurposed would be very beneficial. If at the end of the day, we make no money at all from this, because all of those properties are brought back into full use on the island for islanders, I would be happy with that outcome.
Thank you, Councillor Jarman. Again, just one point I will make, because it's often job to scrutinise, is that the number of actual second properties that this was paid on increased in Wales between 2017-18 and 21-22, rather than a decrease in actual properties. So it isn't as straightforward, and I think we need to be very mindful of it. And I would encourage that. I know it's always easy to say the Isle of Wight's very different. I would encourage whoever it is that's in the role by that point to work with other councils doing this, because this is a huge problem across the south coast, in fact, not just the south coast. Any further questions?
Sorry, just to answer you a little bit on that and to come back, we'll all be aware of the schemes where this has been tried already ahead of the legislation, including those in Devon. And what they found in some of those locations was that during COVID, the figures were greatly distorted because people were moving out of the cities and actually starting to occupy second homes they'd had previously and then disposing of properties they had back in the city. We also heard, of course, very clear evidence where you did not have a defined locality and you might enact this within a town, and all it did was to simply ripple the second home ownership outside of the geographic bounds of that regulation and had a ripple effect progressively outside of it. The advantages of an island, I think, are fairly obvious. That rippling out of the island off into the English Channel or into the Solent is probably unlikely. And I think people here have a very different rationale. And again, that makes the comparison with us, with Wales or Devon or any of the other situations equally complex.
I will make the point. We shouldn't see ourselves as different to our detriment. But anyway, I take your point, Councillor. Yes, Councillor Drew.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to what we've been discussing, I was just wondering what provision has been made for the budget of enforcement, because I think clearly we can have a very long and protracted debate about how this is going to work in terms of actually bringing it into the legislative framework. But unless we can actually be sure that those individuals who are second homeowners, often quite tax sophisticated individuals, there are frankly, sadly, a myriad of ways in which they can avoid this particular legislative provision. What, therefore, provision has been made for beefing up our enforcement division?
So you're probably aware that we've already done some work on this in terms of checking the empty properties that we have on the island, and there's been a reactive review going on looking at the status of number of properties, and we've a person who's in force doing that as we speak. I think in terms of actual enforcement of these regulations, first of all, we'd have to know what the actual detailed wording of the regulations are that we were seeking to enforce. And then to understand what the best way to tackle that is within the budget. Now, one could imagine a situation where that not all of the properties would be converted back. Some of them would remain as second homes. Some people would opt to pay that, and perhaps because of their more affluent status, as you point out, people would be inclined to do that. And that would provide us with a revenue base to secure additional enforcement.
Any further questions, or should we move on to the final item of the evening, members' question time? As if by magic. Any further questions from members of the committee? No. It was a good debate. Oh, Councillor Quirk. There we go.
A question raised with me by one of my ex. They've moved now, but they still call me because they can't get through to their current councillor. And that's about documents that are available or supposedly available for consultations that we say we'll put into libraries and we don't. And I get, you know who it is, I get a phone call every week that there's a consultation document that isn't available, and they've phoned around 4 or 5 libraries and none of them have got it. If we say we're going to put them into the library, we should put them into the library. And just and I think it depends on which direction is putting the stuff out, and some do it better than others, but we don't do it consistently, and maybe we should be doing it a bit more consistently, even if it's just available on their computer that they can print it off and they know where it is.
Okay, noted. And anything else? Not go out into the cold. Thank you all. Thank you all.